Here's a question that should keep you up at night. How did one empire fight nonstop wars for 600 years without going bankrupt? Think about that. 6 centuries. The Ottoman Empire battled crusaders in Jerusalem, Austrian armies at the gates of Vienna, Persian shahs in Baghdad, Venetian fleets in the Mediterranean, and rebel uprisings from the Balkans to Yemen. They fought everyone, everywhere, constantly. And they didn't collapse from the cost. Compare that to Spain, which went bankrupt 7 times despite looting an entire continent's worth of silver. Or France, which spent itself into revolution trying to fund a few decades of wars. The British Empire borrowed so much to fight Napoleon that they were still paying off the debt a century later. But the Ottomans? They cracked a code that almost no other civilization in history figured out. They made war pay for itself. Welcome to the Financial Historian, where we dig into the money, the mechanisms, and the uncomfortable truths that textbooks usually skip. Today, we're talking about the Ottoman Empire's financial machine. And fair warning, by the end of this, you're going to see some eerily familiar patterns in today's world. Let's start with what the Ottoman Empire actually was. Because if you're picturing turbans, sultans, and grand mosques, you're not wrong, but you're seeing the surface. The empire began around 1299 in a forgettable corner of northwest Anatolia. A warlord named Osman controlled maybe a few thousand fighters and some decent farmland. Nothing impressive. But Osman had timing. The Byzantine Empire was rotting from within. Mongol power in the Near East was fading. And right there, in that power vacuum, Osman's crew started gobbling up territory. Here's the thing though, those early conquests weren't just military wins. They were financial investments. Every village they took meant new crops, new taxpayers, new revenue streams. From day one, the Ottomans understood something crucial. Warfare isn't just about glory, it's about cash flow. By 1326, they'd taken Bursa, a major trading city. By the 1350s, they'd crossed into Europe. And suddenly, they weren't a frontier gang anymore. They were sitting on the single most valuable piece of real estate in the medieval world, the crossroads between Europe and Asia. Imagine controlling every major trade route connecting 3 continents. Silk from China, spices from India, carpets from Persia, Venetian glass, African gold, all of it had to pass through Ottoman territory. And every single caravan, every merchant ship, every trade convoy paid a toll. That's the foundation, not soldiers, not strategy, geography plus taxes. But geography alone doesn't keep an empire alive for 6 centuries. Plenty of empires controlled great trade routes and still collapsed under the weight of their own armies. So what made the Ottomans different? This is where things get interesting, and where the Ottomans deployed one of the most brilliant pieces of financial engineering in human history. It's called the timar system, and it's so clever, it almost sounds too good to be true. Here's the problem every empire faces. Armies are insanely expensive. You need to pay soldiers, feed them, equip them, train them, pension them. Modern militaries consume entire chunks of national budgets. Medieval kingdoms had the same problem, except worse, because there was no steady tax system, and soldiers expected payment up front, or they just walk away. The Ottomans looked at this problem and said, "What if we just don't pay them?" I'm serious. Instead of handing soldiers a salary, they gave them something else, the right to collect taxes. It worked like this. A soldier, usually a cavalryman called a sipahi, would be assigned a timar, essentially a tax district. Could be a village, could be a cluster of farms. Didn't matter. The point was, that soldier now had the legal right to collect taxes from the people living there. In exchange, he had to show up to war fully equipped. Horse, armor, weapons, supplies, everything. He funded himself. The state didn't pay him a dime. Think about what this accomplished. The empire slashed its payroll costs to almost nothing. The soldier became personally invested in keeping his district stable and productive, because if the crops failed, his income failed. And the peasants? They lived under a predictable local authority who had every reason to keep them safe and working. It turned the Ottoman military into a self-sustaining machine. No treasury hemorrhaging. No mutinies over unpaid wages. No budget crises every time the Sultan wanted to launch a campaign. Compare that to Europe, where kings hired expensive knights or mercenary companies who demanded payment in gold, up front, no exceptions. If the money ran out, the army dissolved. The Ottomans didn't have that problem. Their funding was baked into the land itself. It's one of those ideas that sounds insane until you realize it worked perfectly for over 2 centuries. War didn't drain the budget. War activated the system. But the timar system was only half the equation. Now we need to talk about the Janissaries, because they're the piece of the Ottoman military that most people have heard of, but almost nobody understands financially. The Janissaries were elite infantry, disciplined, professional, feared across 3 continents. European armies called them the best soldiers in the world. But what made them financially unique wasn't their training. It was how the empire acquired them. They came from the devshirm, the child levy. Every few years, Ottoman officials would travel through Christian villages in the Balkans and select boys, usually between 8 and 18 years old. These boys were taken from their families, converted to Islam, and enrolled in the empire's military schools. Let's be clear, this was not a volunteer program. It was coercive, it was harsh, and we shouldn't sugarcoat it. But from a purely financial perspective, it accomplished something extraordinary. The Ottoman state got elite soldiers without paying the cost of raising them. Think about it. Normally, if you want a professional army, you need to feed, clothe, house, and educate children from birth until they're old enough to fight. That's 18 years of investment per soldier. The Ottomans outsourced that entire cost to the conquered populations. By the time a boy entered the system, the expensive part was already done. Once they became Janissaries, yes, the state paid their salaries and provided housing. But these soldiers were prohibited from marrying or owning businesses in the early centuries, which kept them loyal and prevented conflicts of interest. They owed everything to the Sultan and nothing to anyone else. Combined with the timar system, this meant the Ottomans had a 2-tier military, self-funded cavalry, and low-cost professional infantry. Both systems reduced the financial burden that crushed other empires. But here's where the genius really shows. The Ottomans didn't just reduce costs, they made sure war paid for itself. By the late 1600s, the world began shifting under the Ottomans' feet. European powers industrialized. They built better guns, better ships, better armies. And critically, they stopped routing trade through Ottoman land. They went around it. New sea routes bypassed the empire entirely, and suddenly, those lucrative tolls started drying up. Internally, the timar system decayed. Local tax holders abused their power. Soldiers became unreliable. Central oversight collapsed. The beautiful machine started rusting. And the Janissaries? Over the centuries, they gained wealth, political power, and influence until they became untouchable. They resisted every reform, drained the treasury, and eventually became the biggest obstacle to modernization. The state that once controlled them couldn't control them anymore. When the empire finally tried to adopt European-style armies, they needed something they'd avoided for centuries: cash salaries. And to get that cash, they did something even more dangerous. They borrowed. In the 1800s, the Ottoman Empire took massive loans from European banks at brutal interest rates. Debt spiraled. Payments fell behind. And in 1881, the empire that once financed 6 centuries of war was forced to hand control of its finances to an international commission run by France and Britain. The Ottomans didn't fall because they lost battles. They fell because the economics stopped working. Here's the uncomfortable part. None of this is ancient history. The timar system lives on as privatized military logistics and defense contracts. Modern governments outsource huge chunks of their military operations to reduce payroll, just like the Ottomans did. Trade tolls? Look at the fights over the Strait of Hormuz, the South China Sea, the Suez Canal. Whoever controls the choke point controls the money. State monopolies? Saudi Aramco, Gazprom, sovereign wealth funds. Same game, bigger numbers. And that late-stage borrowing that killed the Ottomans? Look at modern debt crisis. Argentina, Greece. Pick your favorite over leveraged economy. The pattern repeats. Empires don't die on the battlefield. They die on the balance sheet. The Ottomans survived 6 centuries because they built a financial system so efficient it turned war into profit. They collapsed when expansion stopped paying for itself, when their trade routes became irrelevant, and when they borrowed so much that foreign creditors owned their future. Financial systems can sustain empires for centuries, until the day they can't. If this changed how you see power, hit subscribe. History doesn't repeat, but the logic underneath it never really changes. And that's the part worth understanding.